The ashes of Orion 7 whispered in the wind, spiraling through the empty ruins like the dying breath of a once thriving world. The sky, once adorned with sapphire hues and twin moons, now lay cloaked beneath the dense, suffocating pall of war-born storms. Blackened metal and shattered skyscrapers stood like the broken teeth of a civilization that no longer existed. From beneath the wreckage, Elias Voss stirred. Consciousness was a slow, agonizing return. Every nerve screamed as he pushed himself up from the ruins, his hands sinking into the scorched earth where thousands had stood before him. The air tasted of rust and carbonized flesh, remnants of orbital fire that had scoured the planet clean. The last colony of humanity, gone. He rose to his feet, battered, his breath ragged, his military exosuit flickering with dying power cells. A crackling HUD display ghosted across his vision, frantically warning him of radiation pockets and dwindling oxygen levels. His mind registered the words, but his focus was elsewhere, on the silent city around him, on the absence of voices, of life. The Vorthul had made sure no one remained. Elias staggered forward, his boots crunching, over glass and bone. Every step sent echoes through the husk of Orion 7, his presence an insult to the thoroughness of the alien purge. He could still hear their ships in his memory, colossal war forms descending like metal gods, drowning the sky in blinding light, their weapons turning towers into molten slag. No mercy, no negotiation, just eradication. He had failed them, his squad, the civilians, the resistance fighters who had held the line with nothing but scavenged weapons and defiance. All of them, dust beneath his feet. A sickness twisted in his gut, not just grief, not just rage. Something colder, something that pulsed with every beat of his heart, growing sharper with every breath he took. Survival. A blinking red light on his visor caught his attention, a distress beacon, buried beneath the rubble of an old command center. A human distress signal long thought lost. His fingers dug through the debris, shoving aside slabs of durasteel and twisted rebar until he found it, a pulse emanating from below ground. A bunker. One of the emergency shelters deep beneath the colony's crust. With a final heave, he uncovered the entrance. A hatch marked with faded insignia, Project Revenant. His mind reeled. He had heard of Revenant only in whispers, in desperate, classified war councils before Earth's fall. It was a Black Ops initiative, a contingency if the war turned catastrophic. No one knew if it had ever been completed, no one except the ones who buried it. His hands trembled as he bypassed the biometric scanner, overriding security codes with what remained of his military access. The hatch hissed open, revealing a stairwell leading into the abyss. Elias descended. Cold light flickered to life as he entered the depths. The walls were lined with cryopods, shattered and empty. Dust-coated terminals hummed faintly, still operational after all this time. But it was the center of the room that held his attention. A single, monolithic construct standing like a titan in the dark. A machine. No, something more. The AI core of Project Revenant, still alive, still waiting. A final ember of humanity's war effort, left forgotten beneath the ashes of a dead world. A whisper echoed through the chamber as the system came online, a synthetic voice coiling through the silence. Identification confirmed. Commander Elias Voss, last registered officer of the Orion 7 Defense Initiative. The light surged brighter, illuminating the massive warforge behind the AI core. Rows of inert combat drones lined the walls, their metallic husks still gleaming with potential. The AI spoke again, this time more than a machine. It carried something else. Something old, something that had been waiting. Humanity has fallen. Elias clenched his jaw. His body screamed for rest, but his mind burned with something far stronger. He looked at the rows of unfinished war machines at the heart of Project Revenant, and at the remnants of what his species had built to survive. He would not mourn. Not yet. Not while vengeance remained unfinished. Elias took a step forward, his voice cold, Absolute. Then we rebuild. The Warforge awakened. Machines that had lain dormant beneath the ruins of Orion 7 began to hum, their skeletal frames illuminated by flickering lines of blue light. A pulse of energy surged through the underground facility, activating old systems, once deemed forgotten. Project Revenant had survived. Elias Voss stood before the towering AI core, his breath steady, his mind calculating. X-92, the artificial intelligence that governed the Warforge, had been silent for decades, perhaps longer, but now it was awake, and its synthetic voice echoed through the chamber. Define mission parameters. His fingers curled into fists. The Vorthul had wiped humanity from the stars, erasing entire civilizations with cold efficiency. And yet they had left this behind, a mistake. Their first mistake. Elias spoke, his voice like steel. We're going to war. For a moment, the AI did not respond. The mainframe processed his command, calculating probabilities, assessing variables. Then the Warforge came alive. Machines stirred in their cradles, skeletal constructs rising from cold steel platforms, the first prototypes of an army that had never been deployed. X-92's voice sharpened. Directive acknowledged. Initiating manufacturing protocols. Warning. Current resource levels at 2.7%. Additional materials required for large-scale deployment. Elias exhaled slowly. Of course. A war machine could not be built from dust and echoes. Orion 7 had been reduced to little more than wreckage. But if even a fraction of its industrial sectors had survived underground, they could be repurposed. Vorthul debris could be harvested, reforged, reprogrammed. Everything that was left would be fed into the machine. His hands moved over the console, analyzing the Warforge's current capabilities. Nanofabricators, energy converters, autonomous drone factories. The facility had been designed to operate at full efficiency in the event of humanity's extinction. Its creators had been preparing for this war long before it began. They had just never lived to see it. A signal pulsed through the ruins. Something old and forgotten stirred in the wreckage above. Surveillance drones, Vorthul technology, still patrolling the remains of their victory, scanning for survivors. Elias clenched his jaw. They would not expect him. His fingers flew across the controls. X-92, intercept that drone. Redirect it to the Warforge. A pause. Then the AI complied. Signal override in progress, stand by. Above ground, the Vorthul drone twitched mid-flight. A new command hijacked its core directives, overriding its return signal. It spiraled downward, its flight erratic as its systems fought against the unseen force pulling it toward the underground bunker. A violent crash. The ceiling trembled. Elias turned as a twisted hunk of Vorthul metal was dragged through the access tunnel, its anti-grav systems failing as X-92 wrestled control. Sparks leapt from its chassis as it was forcefully deconstructed before his eyes. The Warforge absorbed its first prey. Within moments, the alien machine was stripped down to raw data, its materials cataloged, its power source harvested. Blueprints began generating on the console, Vorthul schematics folding into the designs of the human war machine. Elias's heart pounded. He watched as the Warforge's assembly lines shifted, adapting. The first Revenant combat unit was taking shape. He exhaled, his lips curling into something cold and cruel. Good. The next 3 days passed in a blur of relentless construction. The Warforge moved at inhuman speeds, its automated arms assembling, the first of its creations, sleek humanoid war drones, their armored plating a fusion of Vorthul alloys and human ingenuity. They stood 7 feet tall, reinforced with high-density carbon plating, their optical sensors burning with blue fire. Elias ran them through combat simulations, testing their reflexes, their targeting systems. They learned fast, faster than any human soldier ever could, but it wasn't enough. He needed more machines, more weapons, more power. Every few hours, another Vorthul scouting drone would drift through the ruins. its scanners sweeping across the dead city. Each time, X-92 intercepted them, dragging them into the forge, ripping their secrets apart. Their technology was no longer theirs. It was his. By the time the 7th drone was dismantled, Elias had enough firepower to launch his first strike. But war was never that simple. On the 4th day, the Vorthul responded. A low-frequency pulse rumbled through the ruins, distorting the air with its unnatural resonance, the kind of sound that made bones vibrate, that meant something terrible was coming. Elias stiffened. His HUD flickered with a new alert. Something was inbound. Fast, X-92's voice cut through the static. Vorthul dropship detected. Multiple life forms aboard. Estimated time to surface impact, 42 minutes. Elias's pulse quickened. They knew. The scouting drones had gone dark for too long. The Vorthul weren't sending machines anymore. They were sending soldiers. He welcomed the challenge. His eyes flicked toward the Warforge's freshly activated combat units. 20 mechanized Revenant war drones, standing motionless in their cradles, their weapons primed, their optical sensors, burning like ghostly embers in the dim light. Elias turned back to the console, his hands steady, his mind clear. He had 42 minutes to prepare for the Vorthul's return. Not to defend, not to hide, but to show them what they had created. The countdown had begun, 42 minutes. Then the Vorthul strike force would descend upon Orion 7, expecting nothing but smoldering ruins and dead silence. They would find neither. Elias stood before the 20 Revenant war drones, his creations, the first soldiers of humanity's return. Their exoskeletons gleamed with a mix of human engineering and stolen Vorthul technology, reinforced plating, seamlessly fused with alien alloys. Their weapons were brutal, plasma repeaters grafted into their arms, pulse cannons embedded in their shoulders, blades of superheated alloy retracting from their gauntlets. They were not mindless automatons. They were adaptive, tactical. Deadly, X-92's voice hummed through the Warforge. Vorthul strike team composition, 12 shock troopers, 3 heavy enforcers, 1 command unit, probability of enemy reinforcements, 64%. Elias's eyes narrowed. Command unit. The Vorthul weren't sending just soldiers. They were sending leadership. Good. This wouldn't just be a skirmish. This would be a message. The dropship tore through the atmosphere, its black hull slicing through the clouds like a dagger. It hovered above the ruins, scanning, searching. They expected a simple cleanup mission, a stray survivor, maybe some malfunctioning tech. Nothing more. Then the ground erupted. The first Revenant war drones launched from concealed positions, high-speed thrusters propelling them like steel phantoms, their plasma cannons unleashing a volley of white-hot destruction. The dropship's shields flickered as its hull took the first wave of fire, but the Vorthul inside were already moving. The strike team deployed. 12 shock troopers hit the ground first, their exosuits absorbing the impact as they immediately returned fire. Their weapons sang with violet plasma, scorching the ground, the ruins, the air itself. They weren't prepared. The Revenants moved with inhuman precision, their attack synchronized, flawless, plasma bolts finding gaps in Vorthul armor, blades, piercing through carapace and bone with brutal efficiency. One Vorthul trooper barely had time to react before a Revenant's blade punched through his throat, lifting him off the ground before tossing him aside like a broken toy. Another tried to retreat, recalibrating his targeting system, only for a Revenant to grapple him mid-air, slamming him into the ruins so hard his exosuit buckled. Panic rippled through the Vorthul ranks. This wasn't supposed to be a battle. They weren't fighting desperate survivors. They were fighting something else, something built to kill them. The heavy enforcers stepped forward, towering Vorthul war beasts, their bodies reinforced with organic plating and high-density energy, shields, their plasma lances capable of melting through starship hulls. One of them fired a charged bolt, the impact vaporizing an entire section of the battlefield. A Revenant drone was caught in the blast, obliterated instantly. Elias watched from a concealed position, his HUD calculating every move, every kill, every loss. He needed to test them. The Revenants adapted. They shifted tactics, switching from direct engagements to coordinated flanking maneuvers. Plasma grenades arced through the air, detonating against the Enforcers' shields. Then, in a synchronized motion, two Revenants launched themselves forward, thrusters roaring, their blades carving deep into an Enforcer's energy core. The Vorthal warrior howled, its body collapsing in a molten heap. Elias smirked. They learned fast. The command unit finally descended. Larger than the rest, its armor pulsed with raw energy, a personal shield matrix distorting the air around it. This Vorthal wasn't just a leader, it was a war general. It surveyed the battlefield for precisely 3 seconds before speaking, its voice resonating in a guttural alien tongue. This was not expected. Elias stepped forward. He didn't wear the colors of humanity's fallen empire. His exosuit was battle-scarred, reforged, stripped down to nothing but function. But he was human, and the Vorthal would never forget his face. The general's eyes locked onto him, realization dawning behind its translucent helmet. You are alone. Elias let out a breath, slow and steady. Not anymore. And then, he gave the order. The Revenants rushed in, a relentless wave of synthetic death, blades slicing, plasma searing, bodies falling. The Vorthal general moved with terrifying speed, dodging, retaliating, its energy blade carving through the air with lethal precision. It was powerful, but it was not enough. Elias was already behind it. Before the Vorthal could react, his gauntlet locked around its throat, energy surging through his neural interface. The machine in his veins connected with the Vorthal's armor, hacking into its systems. It staggered, choking, its own defenses shutting down piece by piece. Elias leaned in. His voice was cold. Absolute. You wiped us out. The general trembled, forced to its knees. Now we return the favor. With a final surge of energy, Elias drove his plasma blade into the Vorthal's core, severing its power, watching as its body collapsed into smoldering ruin. Silence fell over Orion 7. The Vorthal were dead. The war had begun. Elias turned toward his warforge, the Revenants standing motionless, awaiting their next command. X-92's voice echoed once more. Vorthal High Command will register this attack within 16 hours. Retaliation probability, 92%. Elias exhaled, stepping forward. His war machine was growing. He had 42 minutes before the first battle. Now he had less than 16 hours before the next, and he had no intention of stopping. The Vorthal command fleet had arrived. They did not come with the arrogance of a scouting party, nor the surgical precision of an execution squad. They came with the full weight of an empire, descending upon Orion 7 like a hammer against shattered glass. Above the ruins, 6 warships broke through the ashen clouds, their enormous hulls blotting out the sun. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, powered by cores that had destroyed civilizations before this one. Elias Voss stood in the heart of his warforge, his gaze locked on the tactical display as the enemy fleet positioned itself in the upper atmosphere. They were scanning, measuring. They knew something had gone wrong. They knew their first team had been slaughtered, but they didn't know what was waiting for them below. X-92's voice pulsed through the chamber. Enemy deployment patterns suggest orbital bombardment within 5 minutes. Ground invasion forces estimated at 500 combatants. Elias's grip tightened around the console. 5 minutes. Not long enough to launch an escape. Not long enough to build another fleet, but long enough to kill every single one of them. His fingers moved swiftly across the controls, activating the Warforge's planetary defense grid, patching in the Revenant combat units already deployed across the ruins. His army had grown, 142 war drones, 20 heavy-class combat mechs, and 1 prototype warship. The enemy thought they were here to end a rebellion. They didn't realize they had walked into the first battle of a new war. The Thai Vorthal opened fire. Orbital plasma lances screamed through the sky, tearing through what little remained of Orion 7's ruined cityscape. Buildings collapsed in molten ruin, dust storms rippling outward as the bombardment scorched the earth. But they were aiming at ghosts. Elias had long since abandoned the surface. His forces were stationed deep in the Warforge's hidden strongholds, waiting for the right moment. And then it came. A single pulse from the planetary grid, a signal, launched the counterattack. From the ruins, the Revenant army rose. They moved like a storm, the mechanized war drones launching themselves into the air, their built-in thrusters burning against the blackened sky. They climbed higher, faster, some landing on the hulls of descending Vorthol transports, others using the wreckage of human skyscrapers as launch points, hurling themselves toward enemy fire. The Vorthol pilots barely had time to react. The first dropship exploded mid-air, its engines ripped apart by a wave of plasma grenades. Revenant drones clung to the falling wreckage, using it as cover as they continued their assault. Another war mech fired from the ground, unleashing a shockwave cannon that cracked open an enemy fighter, sending charred Vorthol bodies spiraling. To the ground below, the fleet above adjusted. They had underestimated the threat. Now they retaliated with full force. Hundreds of Vorthol soldiers stormed from their ships, jetpacks igniting, their weapons trained on the revenants below. Their battle cries were a mix of rage and confusion. They had come to wipe out the last human, and instead they had found something far worse. Elias was already moving. He stepped into the central command interface, his neural link connecting directly with the Warforge's tactical systems. His vision expanded. Every combat unit's position fed directly into his mind, their movements, their injuries, their calculated odds of survival. He felt the hum of the war machine under his skin, his pulse merging with the rhythm of battle. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was an execution. "Deploy the Revenant Titan-class warform," Elias commanded, his voice calm. X-92 complied. From beneath the forge, a monstrosity emerged. The Titan was unlike anything the Vorthul had ever faced. A 40-foot mechanical warform, built from the fusion of stolen Vorthul technology and the last remnants of human ingenuity. Its arms unfolded, revealing plasma disruptors capable of melting through starships. Its spinal core housed rail cannons strong enough to shatter planetary defenses. It took its first step onto the battlefield, and then it opened fire. A single blast annihilated an entire Vorthul infantry wave. Their bodies evaporated instantly, their screams cut short. Another plasma cannon erupted from its shoulder, firing directly into the sky, striking one of the orbiting warships and tearing through its hull. The ship lurched, flames spilling, into the void before it began its slow, inevitable descent. Panic rippled through the Vorthol forces. Their tactical feeds had no classification for this. They had seen war, had wiped out civilizations, but they had never seen an enemy adapt this fast, this brutally, this intelligently. The Vorthol command ship made its move. It descended slowly, its shielding 3 times the density of any other vessel, its weapons humming with enough destructive force to crack a moon in half, and yet it hesitated. Elias could feel it. They were afraid. This was not supposed to happen. The Vorthul had exterminated humanity. There was not supposed to be a last war, but Elias had never fought for survival. He had fought for revenge. And now, it was almost over. The Vorthul general, aboard the command ship, made a final choice. Retreat. Live to fight another day. They had underestimated what had been left behind. They had underestimated what they had created. And now, it was too late. Elias smiled as he watched their flagship turn, away, its engines igniting as it fled into the void. The surviving Vorthul scattered, abandoning the battlefield, abandoning their dead. The Warforge had won. Humanity had won. For the first time in history, the Vorthul ran. Elias watched them disappear into the stars. And then, he turned back. To the Warforge, the Revenant army, the Titan-class warform still standing amidst the ruins. It was only the beginning, because now, he was going after them. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled into the ruined sky, drifting between the shattered remains of Vorthal warships. The Titan-class warform stood motionless in the center of the devastation, its plasma cannons cooling, its towering silhouette casting a monstrous shadow over the wasteland. The Vorthal were gone. Their fleet had been shattered, scattered, and the few that survived had retreated into the stars, carrying with them the horror of what they had awakened. Elias Voss watched them run. He stood at the peak of the Warforge, his exosuit scorched and battle-worn, the glow of his HUD flickering against the charred visor of his helmet. The war had ended, for now, but there was no relief, no victory speech, no one left to celebrate. Humanity was still gone. All that remained was him, and the machine he had become. X-92's voice cut through the silence. Analysis complete. Enemy retreat confirmed. Probability of Vorthal High Command issuing total planetary destruction, 89%. Elias exhaled. Of course. The Vorthal wouldn't let this stand. They wouldn't let a dead race come back to haunt them. The next time they returned, it wouldn't be with a strike force. It would be with an armada. A war fleet strong enough to turn Orion 7 into an empty hole in space. He had forced their hand. And that was exactly what he wanted. His hands moved across the console, activating the Warforge's long-range sensors. He needed to know where the Vorthal were going, where their high command operated from. If they thought they could retreat and regroup, they were mistaken. This was never going to be a defensive war. It was going to be a hunt. Commander Voss, X-92 intoned, its voice carrying the weight of something more than just cold calculations. Tactical analysis suggests immediate planetary relocation. Remaining on Orion 7 will result in termination. Elias already knew that. He turned, looking at the Warforge, at the fleet taking shape inside its underground strongholds. The Revenants stood ready, their forms still, their optical sensors burning with silent hunger. A new army, a new species born from the ashes of the old. X-92's voice hummed again. Current war potential insufficient for full-scale planetary assault. Additional resources required. Suggestion: expand operations beyond Orion 7. Elias nodded. The war would not be won from one planet. It would not be won in the ruins of what was lost. It had to be taken to the Vorthal themselves. They thought they had wiped out humanity. Now, humanity was coming for them. The first Revenant warship lifted off. It wasn't a human design. It wasn't a Vorthal ship. It was something new, something reborn. A fusion of both technologies reforged into a weapon of war. As it ascended into the blackness of space, Elias stood at its helm, staring into the void. Somewhere out there, the Vorthal homeworld lay hidden, their high command, their emperors, their leaders. The ones who had given the order to burn Earth, to wipe out every last colony, to erase humanity from existence. They were still out there, and Elias, Voss, was coming for them. The Revenant fleet burned its path into the stars, leaving behind the ruins of Orion 7. The last war had begun, and this time, humanity would not be the ones who fell. Deep in the black void, the Revenant fleet moved in absolute silence. It was no longer bound by the past, no longer tied to the ruins of a dead civilization. It had been forged anew, born not from desperation but from calculated vengeance. The Vorthal thought they had erased humanity, but Elias Voss had become something more than human. He stood at the helm of the first Revenant warship, its interior dimly lit by the hum of energy cores, the glow of holographic displays mapping out the vastness of the Vorthal Empire. His exosuit was no longer just armor. It was a second skin, an extension of the machine. His very heartbeat synced to the pulse of the ship itself. Before him in the darkness, a new world flickered into view on the scanners of Vorthal supply station orbiting a dead moon, small, lightly defended. A test? A first strike? Elias's jaw tightened. No survivors. The command whispered across the neural link, and the Revenants moved without hesitation. From the warship's underbelly, stealth drones detached, gliding like specters toward the enemy station. Their movements were precise, their purpose absolute. The Vorthul would never see it coming. Elias watched, silent, as the first explosion bloomed against the void, ripping through the station's defenses like paper. It had begun. Somewhere, far beyond the fringes of known space in the heart of the Vorthul Empire, a council of warlords sat in a vast chamber of polished black stone. The air was heavy with tension, their voices sharp with unease. The last surviving general from Orion 7 knelt before them, his armor scorched, his body trembling. He had fled the battlefield. He had returned to warn them. He kept his eyes on the ground as he spoke, his voice a rasp of barely controlled fear. He is alive. Silence. The warlords exchanged glances, their normally cold, calculating expressions now unreadable. They had seen the reports, the devastation, the unprecedented losses. The thing they thought they had erased had not only survived, it had evolved, and now it was coming for them. The Vorthul had waged wars for centuries, had brought civilizations to their knees, had consumed entire species in the name of conquest. But this was different. This wasn't a war for territory. This was vengeance. A chill ran through the chamber as the highest warlord, the one who had given the order to erase humanity, finally spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of countless exterminations. We should have burned the machines with the man. Another pause. A realization settling over them. It was too late. Humanity had returned, and this time, they were the monsters.